what I most struggle with is, kind of some of the emotional after effects or psychological trauma. And it certainly doesn't help when it still haven't made sense to me.
So you just watched a small part of the story that day. Michael Fanone served as a Metropolitan Police Officer in Washington, D.C. for nearly 2 decades, including years working violent crimes before responding that day on January 6th. He nearly lost his life defending our democracy. Since then, he's continued to speak out about the Constitution, accountability, and what it actually means to uphold the oath that he swore. He's also a father of 4, someone who chose to say, not silent. Please join me in welcoming Michael Fanone. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us. I've had the privilege of getting to talk to this guy throughout these past couple of days as his time in Kansas is drawing to a close. And the one thing that I absolutely love about Michael Fanone, outside of what his service has done for this country, but him as a person, is he tells it like it is. And that's what we need. And so as we start this day, one of the things that I think is important is to set the tone for what happened that day. You woke up that morning, you had your routine. Can you walk us through kind of what you heard on the radio and how that morning went?
Yeah. Easier. So for those of you who are not familiar with the entirety of my career, I'll give you a brief introduction to who I am. So I was born in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Northern Virginia. I was a high school dropout. I became a apprentice carpenter with the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners, and then a journeyman carpenter. And then 9/11 happened. And I think, like so many other Americans, it was deeply impactful on my life, and I felt a call to service. I chose a career of law enforcement, and I began my career in 2001 with the United States Capitol Police. I really loved the job, didn't really like the department. So after 1 year, I left U.S. Capitol Police and joined the traditional law enforcement agency in Washington, D.C., which is the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. And that's where I worked for the next 19 some odd years. I spent the vast majority of my career working in federal task force that focused on violent criminals, narcotics trafficking, and illegal firearms. So I saw a few things before my January 6th experience. But that day began just like every other day. At that time, I was living with my mom, which, I'm not gonna lie to you, I made some pretty bad financial decisions throughout the course of my life that resulted in me at the ripe old age of 40 returning home, but that's where I was at. And my mom and I had like a morning routine. We'd share a cup of coffee and talk about whatever. It was mid-morning or late morning that I started getting phone calls from, namely my partner who you saw in the video, the ugly redheaded guy, Jimmy, who was also getting phone calls from colleagues at work, and they were talking about this rally that was taking place, the Stop the Steal rally. And listen, as somebody who was working narcotics at the time, that was the furthest thing from my mind. None of us were thinking about that rally. But what was unique was the fact that there were individuals in the crowd that were armed, that had firearms. And this was being reported over the radio, and there were individuals who were already at work that day who were, reaching out. And so that was concerning, but again, not my area of responsibility. Around 12:30, I think was when the first reports came in that a large group, approximately 15,000 participants in that rally, which was taking place, if you're familiar with Washington, D.C., it was in the Ellipse, which is that big open park just south of the White House. Well, the White House is located between 15th and 16th Street in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Capitol is between 1st and 3rd. We're talking about, my math is bad, but, more than a dozen city blocks. And this group started marching to the Capitol. So I decided I was going to head into work. And it was shortly after 1 p.m. that the first perimeter was breached on the west side of the Capitol. And that's when I started hearing radio calls coming in that officers were being assaulted. And that's when I made the decision that I was going to do something I hadn't done in the better part of a decade, and that was put on a uniform. And I self-deployed to the Capitol along with my partner, Jimmy Albright. Every time I get introduced, people describe me as a defender of democracy from January 6th. And I am engaged, obviously, in that fight for our democracy. But on January 6th, I was just a cop. And I was a cop that was responding to the Capitol, not because of what was happening that day in the certification of the election, not because of, the politicians that were inside. I went there to back up my fellow officers. I heard they were in distress, and that's what you do when you're a cop. You drop everything and you go help. When I got to the Capitol, I, again, self-deployed, wasn't part of any coordinated response. So I was really just kind of wandering around trying to figure out where I could be useful. And that's when we heard a distress call come out from the Lower West Terrace Tunnel. Lower West Terrace Tunnel is significant in that it's the tunnel that the president-elect walks out onto the inaugural stage to take the oath of office. Other than that, it's a pretty insignificant place in the Capitol. But I remember getting there and seeing 50 police officers, many of which had been fighting there for the better part of 2 hours. And obviously my viewpoint at that moment was obstructed, but what I later learned was that this was the pinnacle of the violence that day, and that there were thousands upon thousands of rioters who were trying to gain entry to the Capitol just through that one choke point. The tunnel was loud, it was chaotic, it was filled with chemical irritants, CS gas, bear mace, pepper spray, all of the above. So it was difficult to breathe, and that's where I found myself fighting side by side with a few dozen other cops. And at one point, I made my way to the front line, having just got there, and it was. I described it in one interview as a medieval battle scene, in that you couldn't slide a credit card between two people. So the idea that we were throwing punches and all that, you couldn't even cock your fist back to throw a punch. It was literally body weight pressed against body weight. Us trying to push them out, them trying to push us in. And that went on for a considerable amount of time. And then at one point, we started to gain ground, and the momentum pushed us forward. And a man by the name of Albuquerque Cosperhead from Tennessee put me in a chokehold and pulled me off the police line out into the crowd. And that's the one who you heard on my body-worn camera footage say, "I got one." I was pulled out into the crowd, away from the police line, surrounded, restrained, beaten, struck with a taser device. And as a result, I suffered a traumatic brain injury, which was the 7th of my law enforcement career, and I had a heart attack. And I lost consciousness. And I spent the better part of 3.5 days in the hospital. And that, unbeknownst to me at that time, was the last time that I would, really be a cop. It took me 9 months to return to full duty, which I did. And at that point, I had become pretty outspoken. I had testified before Congress in the first select committee hearing. And none of this was supported by the city or my police department. And so when I returned to full duty in, I guess it was late October, early November, I thought that I was going to be assigned to the academy. I had had discussions with the department, and I knew that my narcotics career was over, but I thought that, I could still be useful. I had 5 years left before I could get a pension. And they had other plans in mind. They assigned me to the Technological and Analytical Services Bureau, which is a really fancy way of saying the IT department, which for a high school dropout that still unplugs his computer to turn it off, not the best place for me. And I found myself, one of the other responsibilities that we had in the Technological and Analytical Services Bureau was we handled maintenance facility calls for the police stations. So here I am, after having endured everything that I had, not just on January 6th, but 20 years as a narcotics cop. And I'm picking up the phone and sending maintenance crews to unclog a toilet at the First District station. So, could I have written it out and done another 5 years and collected my pension and gone on? Yes, but I didn't. I quit. I eloquently wrote a letter on a Dunkin' Donuts napkin, in which I told the department to fuck off. And I slid my badge and my gun across the desk, and that was the last time that I stepped foot inside of a police facility in Washington, D.C. And it was really painful. If you're in that profession, you know that it becomes like your entire life. And those were all my friends, and it just was gone, like in an instant. And so I left with not even the shirt on my back, because I had to turn that shit into the property division. And that was it. That was the end of my law enforcement career. And here I am.
So one of the issues that we deal with, and I say we, knowing it's fully you, we just saw video proof of what happened that day. And people are gonna leave today and encounter individuals across this city that are going to say, it was just a peaceful protest. What do you say to those folks?
I'm sure everyone in here knows exactly what I say to those folks. I'm going to try to limit the curse words as much as humanly possible. But yeah, no, I remember to me what was the kickoff for this alternative reality that we're experiencing when it comes to January 6th, and it was a congressional hearing. For those of you who may or may not remember, at that point, in the aftermath of January 6th, we were still in the midst of COVID times, and so all these hearings were being done remotely. And there was a representative, and his name is Andrew Clyde, he's from Georgia, and I implore you all, at the end of this, please give his office a call and let him know how you feel about it. But he was the one that famously said, if you watch the video footage from January 6th, you would have thought it was a normal tourist day at the Capitol. Obviously, I was pissed off. But it wasn't just me. My phone rang from dawn to dusk and beyond from colleagues, many of which I had never met, never spoken to in my entire life, that had gotten my number from another person who had gotten it from another person. And simply because at that point I had given several interviews, they were looking to me as, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? This is outrageous. How can they say this? And I shouldn't have to say this, but these are people from all across the political spectrum. So, this idea that the Metropolitan Police Department or the U.S. Capitol Police Department are these radical leftist lunatic cops is that utterly insane. The vast majority of the people that were fighting alongside me in the Lower West Terrace Tunnel, I know most of them, and they are all supporters of the Trump administration at the time. And so, let's contradict that narrative. But I made the determination at that point to make a copy of my body-worn camera footage and give it to or leak it to the press, which at that point in time, I had a friendship with Don Lemon from CNN, and I called him up, and I think at that point, he had given up on me ever doing an interview on his show, or, and I said, hey, listen, like this, obviously this just happened. Andrew Clyde said this. I was like, he's like, you want to go on the show? I was like, no, I don't want to go on the show. I want you to play my body-worn camera footage as much as you can, without commentary, just let it speak for itself. Because at that point, we were already so distrustful of one another in this country that I knew I could go up there and I could talk about my experience, and they could even play some little snippets from my body-worn camera footage, but it wouldn't do anything to move the needle when it came to combating this narrative. And so, to their credit, they played a lot of my body-worn camera footage. I think more than 15 minutes of it without interruption. And that really, I think, was the moment in which I went and dove full on into activism. Obviously, at that point, my motivation was simply to counteract this narrative that January 6th didn't happen, or that it wasn't violent, or that it wasn't inspired by the President of the United States. I heard the opening remarks for tonight, and the idea that we're going to have to learn to come together as a country, and I am a firm believer in the necessity of compassion and empathy, especially for people that were duped, that were manipulated, that were bamboozled, so to speak, by this administration. Because there was a point in time where I was duped. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016, and so my hope was that my story and the evolution of my thought process could help bring some horses to water, so to speak. And it hasn't. I haven't been as successful as I thought, but I've also, I think, done a good job of galvanizing people to stand up and speak out, to stand up for your neighbors.
think one thing that's important, you talk about in your book, when you got out of the hospital, you didn't just stop. You pushed congressional leaders, you pushed our politicians, you had meetings with them, fighting continuously. Can you talk about those responses and the communications from those politicians?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the evolution of my motivations for being outspoken, the origin is I wanted acknowledgement for my fellow officers. The things that I saw on the Lower West Terrace Tunnel on January 6, 2021 were some of the most selfless and courageous acts that I had experienced in my entire career as a police officer. There was a understanding that there was little to no likelihood that we were going to survive. I think we all anticipated eventually being overrun and trampled to death, as some were in the tunnel. And so the idea that these people would voluntarily stay and continue to fight despite overwhelming numbers and a slim chance of getting out of there, unharmed or alive. And so I wanted acknowledgement. And this was a major event. I mean, 15,000 people stormed the Capitol. They beat the shit out of cops. They terrorized the occupants of that building. It's not just members of Congress that were in there, staff members, reporters. Some people who I've spoken to who have never stepped foot back in the Capitol ever again. A lot of them who, were really smart people, really empathetic people, good people, people that we want involved in our government, left that career path altogether. Journalists, young journalists that were starting their careers on the Capitol Hill beat that chose a completely different career path because they were so horrified by that experience, and then obviously the aftermath. And the misinformation, the disinformation, the politicizing of that day. But I wanted acknowledgement, and you say meetings, which I think denotes like some type of organized structure. Like I just went to the Capitol by myself and started banging on doors and going into offices and yelling at people. And it works. So, because the thought process at the time was Democrats were, still neck deep in the defund the police movement. So any optics of embracing law enforcement was almost out of the question. And then obviously the Republican Party was dealing with the fact that this was not politically advantageous, that it was our supporters that stormed the Capitol and beat up these cops. And so, when I talk about politicization of January 6th, it was politicized by both sides of the aisle. In the fact that we were abandoned by one and we were demonized by the other. And so, that was hard work advocating for that. And fortunately, I found, one particular member, and love her or hate her, I happen to love her, but Nancy Pelosi, took up that and drafted legislation to award the members of the Metropolitan Police Department and U.S. Capitol Police the Congressional Medal of Honor. I think the sad thing, I guess, for me was that, they say, you never want to see how the sausage is made. At that point, I had already seen how the sausage was made, and by the time that, medal was handed out, it just was meaningless to me. And I'll be honest with you, it was to a lot of the other officers. It was too little, too late. It was seen as an act of pandering, and I think that contributed to these massive losses that we saw in our respective departments, hundreds of officers that resigned after January 6th. And it was not the trauma of the day. It was the way that they were treated after that. I had a lot of conversations with Noah. He's got a military background, so we're kind of cut from a similar cloth. But I talked about this idea that, I experienced a lot of traumatic days over the course of a 20-year career in law enforcement. But I never had a situation in which I experienced something and then afterwards had a colleague or a coworker or a supervisor come and tell me, well, that actually didn't happen. What are you talking about? That's what happened here. And then these lawmakers who, their words matter. When they use the credibility of their office to say things like, it was just a normal tourist day at the Capitol, well, their constituents who elected them believe that shit. And so, you can imagine what it's been like for me to travel the country and talk about January 6th and encounter people all the time who are like, you're a liar. You're a plant. It was staged. Yeah.
One thing that we talked about, you took an oath to uphold the Constitution, as does every other officer. And as we move forward in time from January 6th to where we are now, can you talk about the need for good officers, for good training, for good community relations, from your perspective?
Yeah, we can go all the way back to 2015, 2016, when this country was experiencing a level of attention on polarizing incidents involving communities of color and law enforcement agencies. And, obviously there were a lot of conversations that were being had within the police department about these different interactions. And there was a lot of demonization of law enforcement as a whole at the national level, whether it was in the media, whether it was in our politics, which I found to be very unproductive. I saw it as an opportunity. We can have a conversation, a transparent, productive conversation about why these incidents are happening. Because to me, there are certainly many unexcusable incidents or events in which the officer's conduct was just completely outrageous and goes outside of anything that you can describe as law enforcement actions. But at that time, I was also, I had a part-time job or another job in which I was working for a private training facility. And so I came to have a completely different perspective on a lot of these events. And many of them I saw as a lack of training. Because we used to say in the training, we had a mantra, and the mantra was, quality training breeds proficiency in weapons and tactics. And officers who are proficient in those things are confident, and confident officers use less force. And so the whole idea of defunding the police, or even, taking away from their limited budgets, which anyone will tell you that actually understands those numbers, that police departments, I'll give you an example. The Metropolitan Police Department has a budget of, it's like $290 million a year. And that might sound like an incredibly exorbitant number, and it is. But when you find out what that money goes to, then you realize that it's actually not a lot. The vast majority, I think 90% or 93% of our department's budget goes to paying salaries and retirements. So when you factor in the fact that you've got decades of officers collecting pensions, and all of that money goes to paying that, we're left over with a very small budget that's supposed to cover everything. There was a time when I was a cop that if your car got a flat tire and you wanted to drive a car the next day, you went and bought your own tire. Because the department didn't have the resources. Or we had tires that had 50 patches in them I mean, and that was the reality of inner city policing. And so I saw it as a training deficiency, but obviously it was a huge opportunity missed in this country to engage in a productive conversation about policing and police reform. Yeah, that was a huge missed opportunity.
Well, when you talk about engaging in that productive conversation, I think, it's the elephant in the room that we currently have an agency that is on the street and has executed 2 individuals. Can you talk about ICE?
Yes, so first it's ICE and it's Customs and Border Patrol. They're agencies that fall under Homeland Security, which is the agency that was created post 9/11 to kind of encompass all of these different agencies. I remember when, before ICE was ICE, it was INS. And so, listen, you have a couple of different things that are going on. One, you have an agency, Customs and Border Patrol, whose mission is really closer to a military mission in the way that they protect the borders and not a law enforcement mission. And I say that is because it should be common sense, especially to, our politicians and our leadership in this country, that not all law enforcement jobs are interchangeable. Not even all law enforcement jobs within the same agency are interchangeable. Going from being a juvenile sex crimes detective to being a narcotics detective to being a patrol officer are incredibly unique positions that require unique skill sets. And so this idea that you could just pull essentially a paramilitary agency off the border and then deploy them on American streets and think that they are going to treat people with respect, civility, and kindness, and also adhere to the Constitution is absolutely insane to me. And it should have been to people like Stephen Miller and Christy Nolan. Yeah, boo. What? I mean, it also didn't help when people like Stephen Miller and Christy Nolan and Pam Bondi and Greg Bovino, Tom Homan traveled the country talking to these agents and agencies and telling them that, the gloves are off, so to speak. And that when they spit, we're going to hit. That was Donald Trump's own words. And so saying that to these agencies, and then Stephen Miller coming out and saying that, well, all of our federal agencies enjoy complete and total immunity, which is complete and total bullshit. But I mean, we've seen the fruits of that labor in the way that they conduct their enforcement operations, which is equally insane. I mean, if you watch the first deployment of ICE and CBP to Los Angeles and this parade that they put on through the city streets and marching through MacArthur Park, where it was literally empty at the time, and putting on this spectacle, which is only designed for one thing, to intimidate. And they're not just there to intimidate the undocumented or immigrant communities. They're there to intimidate each and every one of us. To show the unadulterated power of the federal government and what they can do, which is the same thing, with the deployment of the National Guard troops to our streets. It's an intimidation tactic. It serves absolutely no public safety purpose. The deployment of National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. has done nothing to lower crime and enhance public safety. And quite frankly, it's a waste of these young men and women who have chosen this path of service. And you've got them out there. I mean, in Washington, D.C., they had them out there doing yard work. I mean, how many people in here were in the National Guard? got any guardsmen? Okay, so you know, like, these guys give up their time, leave their families, to go on these types of domestic deployments. So the idea that over the Christmas holiday, you would tear people away from their families and their loved ones to walk around Washington DC aimlessly and to pick up garbage and, you know, rake leaves was just, I mean, to me shows this utter disdain for people that, real patriots in this country.
So you talk about, and I agree with you, it's an intimidation tactic. And right now, the lay of the land is we have an administration that said that they're floating the idea of running for a third term. They're engaging in bombing of Iran. And then they've also added that there's potential that ICE or CBP will be at polling stations ahead of this midterm. When we talk about intimidation tactics, can you talk about the road towards this midterm given the lay of the land?
Yeah, I mean, people often ask me, like, what can we do, what can we do? Like, we're already doing it. You're seeing it play out in the streets of Minneapolis, you're seeing it play out in the streets of Chicago. You have, you know, the average, everyday citizen engaging, filming, documenting these encounters. You have dozens, hundreds, thousands of local organizations that have been born out of this moment to assist the migrant community, to, you know, monitor ICE and CBP, document their activities. I mean, the reason why we're all so outraged about this moment is because we were all watching it play out in our social media feeds all day long, every day, and that's because of the courage of, you know, local residents to step outside their front door and rather than turning a blind eye to something that's happening, not necessarily to them, but to vulnerable members of their community, is exactly how you combat this moment. But we've got to get to a point in this country where we start believing that Donald Trump is actually going to do the things that he says he's going to do. And there's a pattern here. You know, it starts in the fringe areas of his party with people like Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon will travel around and he'll say something on a podcast like, we're going to use ICE and CBP to surround polling places to make sure that we have free and fair elections. And we've already seen the corruption of the Department of Justice and the weaponization of law enforcement agencies against the American people. And I would, you know, a perfect example of that was, you know, in Georgia, where, you know, Donald Trump famously called the governor and said, you know, I need you to find me however many votes. Well, the FBI just executed a search warrant at one of their polling stations and seized all of the ballots from the 2020 election. And then we later learned from the judge in that case that the warrant that allowed for that search and seizure was based on lies. That's not me saying that, that's the judge's own words. And so he's, you know, put a halt to then the administration's ability to actually look at all of that data. But I mean, who the hell knows if they're going to adhere to that? If they're willing to lie in a you know, sworn affidavit, then I don't think there's any you know, there's no stopping them when it comes to any other legal parameters. But I think what we need to do is prepare for this, prepare for the worst. If they're going to make voting that much more difficult, then we need to come up with a way to make sure that we can get people registered, to get them the documents that they need. If they're going to take away the ability for you to go to the library to get a passport, well then, you know, find other methods. And then, on top of that, when you're engaging in that, document, videotape, make a video of you going and look at how hard it is now for us to get registered to vote. Look at how hard it is for us to go vote. Look at all the hoops and hurdles that this administration is putting in front of us to accomplish literally like the most fundamental principle or fundamental right as an American, which is the choice, the ability to choose our leadership and to choose the path forward for us as a nation.
So you talk about the courage citizens have to stand up and video, and we can see through the audience many people videoing. You've also had to engage with legacy media and deal with what comes with that. I'm interested in your thoughts on how we use what these people are doing in the audience right now to video compared to what legacy media should be doing.
Well, there's been a lot of news recently with regards to legacy media. I think Paramount just took over like HBO or whatever. They're going to run CNN. Legacy media, I don't think this should come as a shock to anybody in this room, is dead. It's not dying, it's dead. Like so many of our national Democratic leaders, it's not meeting this moment. And so I think that it's become, there are still people, my dad still turns it on, CNN, because it's just a habit. And he's, but independent media, social media is the future, is what's happening. It's not even the future, it's right now. And so, listen, when I left the police department and I quit, I didn't quit with any ideas of what I was going to do going forward. And so I found myself like without a job or an income or a paycheck. And so I called up my friend at that point, Don Lemon, and was like, hey, you think you can give me a job at CNN? And he's like, yeah. And I got a job at CNN as a law enforcement analyst. And I'll tell you why I wanted that job. Because at that point, I didn't see January 6th as being an issue that was going to continue on. And I was ready at that point, honestly, to move on from that issue. And so I thought that given my experience in law enforcement, that I could be a part of the national conversation, which was so ill represented in legacy media when it came to the rank and file officer's perspective. If we're gonna have this national conversation about policing and police reform, like, who better to do it than me? At least that's what I thought in my mind, because I'm not beholden to anyone. At that point, I'm not beholden to the police community. Like, I'm all about having an honest conversation so that we can actually fix shit. And so that was my motivation for that. It was an eye-opening experience. Legacy media is very much performative. The people that, it wasn't, if you're looking for compassion, kindness, and community, that's not the place to go to work. It was such a toxic environment. It made me feel awful. I was treated like shit because I was a former cop, high school dropout. Like, I wasn't an elite intellectual. And so, they would cart me out every once in a while and have me say something about January 6th, and then they would put me back in the shelf. And then I kept writing op-eds and arguing, to be much more of a law enforcement representative, and they just weren't having it. And then finally, after Mark Zucker left, or Jeff Zucker, I always get the two of them combined. Jeff Zucker left, It was, I can't remember the name of the guy that, Chris Lick took over. I used to call him Chris Lick my balls. And we didn't get along. He was part of the, we need to like make things more moderate at which when they say that, what they really mean is like, we're willing to entertain liars in order to appeal to a broader demographic. It's not about being more middle of the road, it's not about any of that, it's just we're willing to bring people on and platform people on our network that are liars, that are lying to your face, and then pretend in some way that that what we're doing is we're having like an inclusive conversation about whatever. And so I was pretty much at my wit's end, and then they did Caitlin Collins hosted the town hall for Donald Trump, and I wrote an op-ed for CNN, and it was entitled, CNN, or my employer is hosting a town hall for a guy that tried to get me killed. And CNN declined to run that op-ed. So I sent it to Rolling Stone magazine, and of course they ran it. And then I never went on TV on CNN ever again.
Hell yeah. So, in the realm of media, I know that you're a massive TikTok star, and obviously this is your realm. But looking out at the lay of the land, it's important that we get this younger generation involved, especially in this midterms. And I know technology isn't your thing, even though, you're an IT guy now. Technology is not your thing, but standing up when it's uncomfortable is. So how can we get this younger generation to stand up even when it's uncomfortable?
They're kids, force them. You gotta meet people where they are. And I was at, like, I really, he's not here today, but my brother was, he was the one that really started all of this, like the social media stuff, and because I was like, I didn't want to do it. I thought it was stupid. And I thought that, like everybody that I saw on social media, it was like a grift. It was like, let me put forward some clickbaity material. I can't believe I just said that. And so I can generate subscribers and likes, and then I can monetize my, my efforts and make money off of it. And that's why you see, like, Dave Chappelle once said that he could never be a social media guy because social media people are negative. Because the fact of the matter is the algorithms that run social media support negative content. Negative content is what garners engagement and attention, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And so when I did this, I said, well, if we're going to do it, like we're just going to put forward like content that, like, I'm never going to address a story or talk about something because it's like anything other than something that's just important to me at that moment or important in that moment. And I think that, like, you can use those tools for good, so to speak. Sometimes I'll do a video and it gets a ton of engagement. Sometimes I'll do a video that's equally important that doesn't, but the reality is, regardless, I'm putting it out there and I'm, trying to draw attention to certain stories, but you've got to use these tools that that kids or younger folks are engaging with to engage with them, in the hopes that maybe they will see something. And I'll give you a prime example of how it actually works. So many of you may have seen some viral clips of me at the Jack Smith congressional hearing that took place recently. So first, like, very organic moment. Like everything that I do, pretty much I'm like Forrest Gump, like I just go and get in line, and then hilarity ensues. But I just went to the hearing for one reason. I went to the hearing, well, two reasons. One, to see Harry Dunn, Aquilina Goodell, and Danny Hodges, because everybody's busy doing their own thing. We don't have that many opportunities to get together. But I also wanted to be there to support Jack Smith. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Jack Smith. I think he's a consummate professional. He is a real man of honor and integrity and courage, because he accepted that position late in the game, knowing full well that the likelihood of him having the time to complete that investigation was slim to none. And he did it anyways. And he knew that he was going to be attacked, and he was going to be demonized by Donald Trump, and he has been. I think in the past month, Donald Trump has called him a demonic, deranged lunatic more than 180 times. Yeah. But, so I went there to support him, and many of you may have seen like the initial interaction that I had was with this guy, Ivan Ranklin. I hate saying his name. I don't want to give the guy any more attention than he deserves, which is none. But he's a right-wing provocateur. And he and I have a long history of him showing up and harassing me at different events where my family was present. And, you know, it's, he's a sick person. He really is a sick person. And there was an exchange there where, you know, I told him to fuck himself, and that garnered a tremendous amount of attention. And then obviously I had the exchange with Troy Nels. For those of you who watched the hearing, I heard C-SPAN's ratings were through the roof that day. Troy Nels, who is a member of Congress, I believe from Texas, but if you know the backstory of Troy Nels, he was a sheriff's deputy, and he was fired from his department for mishandling evidence. So he's a corrupt cop. And on top of that, he used stolen valor to get himself elected, claiming that he was a combat veteran when he was not. But this is the typical politician. And here he was deviating from questioning Jack Smith, who was the witness there that day, and deciding that he was going to take time to address four police officers, former police officers, and tell them that, in fact, Donald Trump was not responsible for January 6th. But it was essentially our, as law enforcement's, incompetence that resulted in January 6th. So obviously, that resulted in the cough heard around the world, in which I said, cough, go fuck yourself. And then, we locked eyes for a moment, and he told me that I needed to be medicated or on medication, and I gave him a finger. But what I'm getting at is these viral moments drew a tremendous amount of attention to the Jack Smith hearing, which, listen, what he had to say was tremendously important, and I'll paraphrase or summarize. Essentially, it was that as a result of the DOJ's investigation, he believed that they had, in fact, proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump engaged in fraud against the American people, and then that fraud resulted in the violence that we saw on January 6th, and that he was prepared to make that case in court. And he said that under oath. And so Americans needed to hear that. And fortunately, because of my silly ass antics, a lot of people were drawn to that. Like, oh, we see what Mike Fanone did. Well, why is he there? Oh, he's there because Jack Smith's testifying. And then looked into what Jack Smith said. And that was kind of like a pipeline for them to get real information. And so, if I get to tell people to fuck themselves and give them the middle finger, and that makes us a better planet, then I'll do what I gotta do.
Well, I'll say you do it well. You do that very well. But you know what Jack Smith said was incredibly important. And then thinking about what he said, the very next question that comes to my mind after hearing that Donald Trump, there's beyond reasonable doubt, committed fraud, how can we get the accountability that the American people deserve?
I think the most direct way, what you can do right now is to continue these protests. Continue making noise, generating energy, and getting other people involved. Step two, obviously, is hopefully we will have them free and fair elections in the midterms. But it's not enough to elect candidates. We need people that are honest with the American people, that are authentic. No more millionaires and billionaires in Congress. But I was having a conversation earlier today, and a big part of that is if we don't want any more millionaires and billionaires in Congress, we've got to step up. And I know that times are tough and pocketbooks are tight, but we've got to donate that $5 and that $10 or that $15 to the candidates that really truly represent us. Because if we want someone that is like us, then they probably don't have the money to run their own campaign either. And so that's really going to, and get these corporate dollars out of my face too. So that's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of effort on our parts. And if you can't get the money, volunteer. Even small races require a tremendous amount of support. And so, that's what I would encourage people to do. And then making sure that these, I tell national party members, especially, obviously Democrats, not a lot of Republicans talk to me, but you gotta learn how to walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. You can advocate for affordability, which is a real thing, despite what Donald Trump says, but also advocate for accountability for this administration's crimes. And, at the end of the day, man, I'm a cop, and I'm an accountability guy, and I believe that if you do something wrong, there's room for compassion and empathy, but you gotta be punished. And so, if we're gonna send the message as the American people that we're not gonna tolerate these types of crimes from our political leaders in the future, then that's got to start with holding this administration accountable for its crimes. And, a component of that is making sure that leaders draft legislation to shore up our republic and protect us and protect our institutions from having this ever happen again.
I think another elephant that is within this country is, with your background in the military community, police officer community, and the amount of reports you've had to run and write, looking at evidence. Give me your thoughts on these Epstein files.
Well, actually, I was not the report writing guy. It was my first supervisor, Gigi Neal. He used to tell me that different strokes for different folks. Writing was not my strong suit, but I still wrote my fair share, and it's insane to me. The Epstein Files saga is utterly insane, and I think the most insane part about it is that they're just, it's like they're not even trying to lie anymore or hide it. They're just saying, well, we're just not going to give you half of the files, or we're going to put out all of these files, and we're going to redact all the perpetrators and let you see all the victims. Like I know a little bit about, that process, and, the people involved are not that dumb. And they don't make those kind of mistakes at the level that we've seen. And so my only conclusion that I can draw from it is that it's intentional. And, right, yeah, the Dallas 50,000. And also, we've got to go to war with Iran. But don't worry about those Epstein files. And I mean, just think about those things for a minute. Like, think about Pam Bondi's testimony before Congress and her just utter disdain for any level of oversight or accountability. The politicization of our institutions, like the Department of Justice, the FBI. I mean, these are people that I worked with throughout the entirety of my career. In Washington, D.C., we don't have a state's attorney's office. We use the U.S. Attorney's Office as our local prosecutors. And so, and I can tell you right now, I don't know anyone anymore at the Department of Justice. They've all left. They've either been fired or they quit. Not one single solitary prosecutor. And right now in Washington, D.C., where we're mandated for 250 full-time prosecutors, we have less than 90. And so, you don't see it, but our institutions, our federal agencies have been gutted. I would even use the word destroyed.
Being here today is impactful, and many in this room would say that you are an American hero. But you're so much more than just that one day. And you're so much more than just that fight. You're a father. You're a son. Can you explain how your family has dealt with this? Because it's one thing for you to stand up and fight, and it's another thing for that fight to spill over to the ones you love.
Yeah, so I got my first January 6th related death threat while I was testifying before Congress in the Select Committee hearing. I'd implore you all, I actually played that in a television appearance I did the following day. It was on Don Lemon's show. But they played it in its entirety, and it's incredibly vulgar. And I wish that I could say that it was the last time that I got one, but it's become such a routine part of my life. But more troubling is that it's become a routine part of my family's life. No one in my immediate family has escaped these threats, and none more so than my mother. My mother is, she's 76, and she lived in the same house for 33 years in Alexandria, Virginia, and last year we had to sell the house. We had to move her for no other reason than her personal safety. She had received at that point multiple swatting attempts, a bomb threat. She had had her home vandalized. And it all culminated with an individual who confronted her in her front yard while she was raking leaves and threw a bag of dog shit on her while yelling that her son was a traitor and that she and I should both hang. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where we are as a country right now. That's what we're dealing with. But, I've had numerous conversations with all of them, and we're a very close-knit family, especially now. They wouldn't have it any other way. So they're very supportive that I continue to come out here, and they're willing to endure the same abuses that I endure, so that I can get this message out.
So one thing that came up yesterday, and I noted it because I knew you wouldn't expect me to ask this again, but you've got a special back tattoo. And I found it funny when you told that story because, well, I'll let you tell it first before I let the audience know that.
Well, now that, so I grew up, I think like my earliest influences were cowboy movies. I had an Uncle John who was obsessed with John Wayne and Clint Eastwood movies. My favorite Clint Eastwood movie was The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And my dad gave me like official movie poster from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And so I got the entirety of that poster tattooed on my back to include the three main characters, Lee Van Cleef, Eli Wallach, and obviously Clint Eastwood. And so that's my back tattoo. That's what I wanted to be when I was growing up. I wanted to be a cowboy.
And this is why I wanted to ask that because, growing up here in Kansas, I think we all know about cowboys a little bit. And a cowboy is somebody that stands up, that works hard, puts in an honest day's work, goes home, and takes care of those around him. But most importantly, a cowboy is somebody that looks the task in the face and says, no matter what, this job has to get done, so I'm going to do it. You're a cowboy, man. And we're actually getting a custom cowboy hat made for you, so I'm going to be shipping that to you. But to end this, because I want the people to be able to meet you, especially if you join us at the protest after this, an opportunity to meet as well. But when you talk in your book about holding the line, it's not just a duty, it's not just a responsibility that you do once and then you move on. It is something that you have to pick up every day. And these group of people came here because one, they want to meet you, an American hero. But two, these people want to hold the line. So how can bona fide now. But how can this group of concerned people support your message and continue to hold the line?
Well, I think first of all, you're doing it. You're here. You're at events like this. Organize amongst yourselves. Local politics are so much more important than national politics. This is your community. Like you have the opportunity to make it what you want. And so my suggestion would be, organize, form groups of like-minded people that are passionate about the issues that you are interested in and push forward, because there's a lot of issues that are under attack. There's a lot of rights that are under attack. There are a lot of groups of people who are under attack in this administration, and so we have to be able to focus on a lot of things all at once, and then when the time comes, come together with all of these groups and support national candidates, support local candidates, protest,
Earlier today, I passed out cards from the Park of Justice, which tells about all of the protests, all of the people in Kansas that are doing exactly what you're telling us. And we are organizing, and it's not even people all over Kansas, Western Kansas, everywhere. And so I just want to thank you for coming, what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, but you're the ones that are affirming the work that you're doing, and you're seeing the results, not only locally, but, you know, at the national level. I mean, I can tell you 100% it's working. It is making a difference. I've traveled all over this country. This is, I think, my final, the one state that I hadn't been to. And so, yeah.
He's always, you know, it's okay, it's okay. He's here now.
Best for last, that's right. But, well, I haven't been to Alaska, so there's that. But, yeah, this is what it's all about. And then, you know, I tell people all the time, like, look at No Kings 1, and then just a short time later, No Kings 2, 7 million plus, not only Americans, but worldwide. And I do a lot of media abroad, and everybody is paying attention to what's happening here. You know, they say this all the time. You know, you hear it, you know, from politicians, from leaders, that we are the beacon of democracy in the world. We are. And what's happening right now in this country is scaring the living shit out of every other country in the world.
Well, as somebody who served this country, I just want to say thank you for your service. And on Thursday night, when we first met Mr. Fanone at Chicken and Pickle in Wichita, I said that there's one thing that Kansas stands above the rest, and it's Kansas hospitality. So if you guys could help me, because this is the last chance I get, can you give Mr. Fanone one last thank you?
Now we can take it outside too, okay? I don't know if you know this, but this organization, all of this happens because of volunteer work. Everybody in Leading Kansas volunteers their time. Michael volunteered his time. He doesn't get paid for this. He has no honorarium. He's touring the country to bring this message to us. So the question I have for you is, what are you going to do next? How are you going to get involved? Everyone said you got to do something. Yep. Well, Chief Plug, Leading Kansas, has a meeting tomorrow night at 6 p.m., Lawrence Public Library, Room A. If a bunch of you show up, we're going to have to move to the damn auditorium. But I'm okay with that.
Hi guys, I'm going to shut it down. I got to go to the protest.
We're an organization that is trying to put on events like this and trying to